All right, so good morning.
Morning.
Right, so today we're going to continue with handout 21. We're going to look at budgets, right? So this is a short handout. We will finish us really quickly and then we will just look at some questions verbally and let's discuss it, right? All right,
No
so we
problem.
all know what a budget is, right? We use it for home and we use it in our general life. Basically, what we have to look at in a budget is what it is about and look at some of the features of it and how it can be used nationally in terms of the country wise. So, budgets being relevant for your personal household and for the country at large, right? So a budget is a short-term financial plan. And you see I have that in bold there. So that part is
Right.
important. It's a short-term financial plan indicating income, which is your money coming in or your revenue, and the intended expenditure, meaning what you intend to spend your money on, to spend your income on. So like for example, if you know your budget, your monthly income per month is $10,000 and minus the taxes, the disposable income is let's just say eight. You want to create a budget on how that $8,000 will be spent throughout the month. Like what proportion goes towards rent if you have to pay that, what proportion goes towards groceries or your bills and all these other things, and what proportion goes towards saving and what you can spend, right? That way, it helps you to plan for the month without possibly going into debt and all these things, right? So it helps an individual to use his or her money just the way they wish and to keep track of their spending. A budget indicates what you can afford and what you cannot. You can decide how to allocate your money based on what gives the most satisfaction or what is a necessity, right? So that will dictate to you how you as an individual will spend your money. Same thing in terms of the government. They would use that rationale behind how they spend their money or their income, right? And remember, most of their income comes from taxes, it comes from exports, it comes from all of those other revenue sources. At the beginning of each financial year, and each financial year starts in September. So it's
September.
like it's like an academic year then. So you know how the academic year starts in December and runs throughout May, June, and all of these things. Same thing with
Oh,
the financial year. It starts in September of the previous year and rolls over into the other one. That's why I realize the budget is always to the end of September. Yeah.
that come like the
So
first
uh-huh.
September to January, the quarter year. That's
Yeah.
why the
Well,
quota.
yeah, because it usually ends like the 30th. That's why the budget is, you're correct. That's why the budget is usually given like around the 30th of September, first week in October, kind of like it has to be given at that time because that's when the new financial year starts.
Yeah. I'm a fire partner in the fire officer, so
Hmm.
we just have to make the quota
Yeah,
every quarter of the year.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, because you'll have to give like a quarterly update and all of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. The main purpose of a budget is to decide how much money the government plans to spend and how much it intends to collect for the forthcoming year. So that part there is important. We want to make sure we know that part, right? The main purpose
Mhm.
of a budget is to decide how much money the government plans to spend and how much it intends to collect for the forthcoming year. And that is a multiple choice question. So we want to make sure we okay with that part. A
Yeah.
budget deficit means that the government has planned to spend more and collect less revenue. That's the reason we have the word deficit there, right? So a budget deficit means we're spending more and collecting less money in revenue, right? And
Is that making sense?
exactly, but
Hmm.
it's not always a bad thing. So a budget deficit is not always a bad thing. But if it's a continuous budget deficit, then yes, then it's a bad thing. But it doesn't mean if you have a budget deficit one year, it's a bad thing completely. No, right? But if it's a
That just gives the
huh?
like in like the right now, like how it is right now.
Right.
So give the people that are writing to do this, I will vote for them. Give them privilege.
Yeah. Well, for the past few years, and I think for the past few months, we've had a budget deficit. So you see how we continuously have that. It's not a good thing in terms because it's putting a strain on the economy. You realize we already have to dip into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, albeit because of the whole virus and all these other things. But that's still quite dangerous because we have to make sure we put back into that fund because that's a rainy day fund, right? And it's like $50 billion they took out of it. So yeah, so if you know you have to go into that means things are really bad. But then I also sort of got a loan from the IDB. So it's like, where's the money funneling through? You have to be able to account and show where the money is going and all of these things. There's a need for transparency. I guess let's be real. How many of us actually sit down and watch a budget presentation? None. Every year I ask students to look at the budget and tell me what it is that they're learning from the budget, but nobody does that because not much persons actually look at it. What they do is that they wait until the review come out, the summary come out, and then look at which ministry gets allocation for, what amount and all of these things. To be honest, I do the same thing because it is quite monotonous and drawn out.
And most people are not if gas gone up or if alcohol gone up.
Basically, that's the Chini mentality. That's true. That's true. All right, so let's continue. A government can afford to have a budget deficit if it has enough foreign reserves to pay for its expenditure. And foreign reserves means foreign exchange or foreign currency, right? That's why I keep telling you, like last class, that a balance of payment, we need to have a favorable balance of payments, at least, right? Meaning we can't always spend so much on imports, because when we spend so much on imports, we are spending away our foreign currency as opposed to saving on it in terms of the exports. Yeah, because if you're spending on it and you're not receiving as much foreign exchange, would that make sense? Would we be able to finance this deficit?
No,
it would be very difficult. Right. So a budget deficit forces the government to borrow funds from foreign as well as local sources. And it's just like when we personally have to take loans, you always have to pay interest. Not so? And usually the interest mean that the amount you borrow is a lot more, is inflated. So imagine when you borrow in foreign exchange in foreign currency, the interest is going to be high. And a lot of places where they can borrow from, where a government can borrow from, would be like, for example, the IDB, would be the IMF and the World Bank, and maybe from other countries too, who will give them a loan.
So in this instance, I really picture it. I found the government borrow from the Chinese. And they
didn't borrow, they stole it all.
Yeah, because I was in a lot of debt.
Yeah.
Instead, like, they make an agreement on we will sell the paycheck and a little clear of XYZ or how much amount.
Well, it could be. I don't know the details of that deal, but it's quite possible. But like, for example, Guyana, Haiti, and Barbados, they were heavily in debt, right? Because they had borrowed from the IMF. Now, Jamaica, remember I was telling you, once you borrow as a country, borrows from the IMF and World Bank and all these other things, they don't have as much control over the decisions, the policy decisions that they have to make. So it becomes very difficult for them to have sovereignty or complete control over their economy, because now they would have to make sure whatever decision that they want to come up with passes along, is in compliance, then it was okay. They get the heads up from the IMF to go ahead with that decision. Like when they had the CPL final a few years back, and they had to bid, the countries had to bid to host the final, right? I think it was Jamaica, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago. If it wasn't Guyana, it was Barbados. And I think Jamaica had come at a certain point in the bid, but they had to withdraw because the IMF restricted them to spend any more money in terms of hosting the finals. I think in the end, Trinidad won. Yeah, and the finals was held here. But remember, for like, in case of that, for like Trinidad, we would more than likely make back that kind of money. because the atmosphere and then the whole landscape for like a CPS final is different in Trinidad, not to be biased, than it is in other countries. Like, for example, when I was held in Guyana a couple of years back, it wasn't all that great of a turnout. So I think all of, in terms of a decision like that, all those things will have to be taken into consideration. But yeah, and even like, for example, when Haiti was heavy in debt. And when they had that earthquake a few years back, and it destroyed them completely, and I think right after they had some of the natural disaster, the IMF cleared them of the debt that they had because they knew Haiti would not have been able to recover and pay them back that dues. So they kind of like reduced them of the burden then, right? But most countries, huh?
They're still in debt to Guyana, regardless. I'm like, they own the country.
Well, I'm not sure. I have to do more research into that to get that. But yeah, that's the situation there. And it's a kind of iffy one. That's why when like we have to borrow money, or like when I mean citizens have to borrow money, it's always at there's always some kind of fine print, you know? It's the same thing like when governments have to borrow money from larger organizations. There's always some kind of fine print. And obviously, yeah, and obviously when you borrow the money, it always has interest to be paid. So you're obviously paying more than it is you would have borrowed in the first place. Right? All right, so let's look at, for example, why government engages a budget deficit. So like, why would they want to do that? They could leave the consumer with more disposable income so that they can increase their demand. Remember, we were talking about disposable income on Wednesday when we were saying that after disposable income is the amount of money you have after you would have paid your bills, meaning your taxes and all these other things, right? So it's the amount of money you actually have in hand to spend, right? So it means now, if it is that they have a budget deficit and consumers have more disposable income, they can spend more, right? And then their demand will increase. So if the demand increases and they're spending more money, it means that there's more economic activity taking place. Because then if demand is high, more companies would have to increase their outputs and produce more. And then that will create employment. And if more persons are employed, national income by default will increase, standard of living will increase. And
yes.
Another, you good there?
Yeah, miss.
Okay, good. Right, number 2, to allow the consumer to improve the standard of living, right? So we just discussed that part there. To increase demand, which will create more employment. Again, you see any ripple effects of when it is persons have more disposable income, what happens? And companies will have more profits to reinvest in the economy. And remember, the reinvested profit is taxed at a smaller percentage, right? So that will continuously drive in terms of innovation and all of these things. As the government spends, they'll create more jobs such as URP and YTEP. Better able to redistribute income. That means put the money that they get from the higher income taxpayers to the lower ones and finance, social services like the welfare grants and all of these things, right? And they'll spend more on roads and schools and hospitals. Ideally, that's what it's supposed to be. So they would improve the quality of life in that aspect. Okay. So sometimes you see not all the time will a budget deficit be a bad thing. These are the good things that come out of a budget deficit, but remember, it cannot be continuous. Measures, when I say continuous, I mean year after year. Measures can be taken to finance a budget deficit. So this here is how they could get the money to finance this budget deficit, make it happen. They could raise the prices of public sector goods and services, such as sugar and flour and petrol, in terms of VAT, right? Raise taxes or introduce new ones. And that personally, but not personally, economically as well, should be a last resort in terms of raising taxes or even introducing new ones. A government has to be innovative other than relying totally on the first and easiest way to increase income, should be raising taxes, right? Because that also poses a strain on consumers that they have to now go and spend additional money going towards taxes. So that in effect, that would mean that the disposable income might be reduced, right?
Because even if they do it to the bigger companies, they're going to take it out on the smaller ones.
That's it. Well, so it's kind of an iffy thing, because I mean, if you're talking about taxes, it could be in terms of what income tax. It could be in terms of like how we had VAT, like how we even did remove the subsidies on gas and all these other things. Remember at one point we had a lot of taxes to pay, everything was increasing.
Yeah,
right?
15 now.
Because that also has a spiral effect of, for example, inflation, right? Right. Okay, so they can borrow from local commercial banks as well, and they can raise the revenue reserves ratio. And they can borrow from international lending agencies such as the IMF and the World Bank and the Organization of American States and all these other things. So what that does, that also poses a strain. But those are the ways that they can finance that deficit budget, right? So it has to be taken with a pinch of salt, basically, right? And budget surplus now. Well, obviously, a surplus means that we have more money and we're spending less. But that also does not mean that it's also a perfect thing either, right? Both has the pros and cons attached to it. So, budget surplus. This is when a government decides to collect more money and spend less in the economy. In this case, revenue is greater than expenditure. Does not always mean it's a good thing. So, reasons for a budget surplus. The first one is that it reduces the level of spending in the economy. That means less money in circulation. That is not a good thing. Because if you do that, that means people are spending less. If people are spending less, that means demand is less. If demand is less, would the companies be producing any much goods then? No, they won't. And if they're not producing much, what will happen to employment?
It will fall.
It will fall. Exactly, perfect. It will fall. So and that persons would end up losing their jobs. Like, let's take, for example, what's going on now. Is there much economic activity taking place?
No.
No, there's not. And we've already seen with the closure of restaurants and bars and all these other things that persons are being retrenched. They're being let go.
One
So
thing
that
the
means
police making real money. That aspect.
Not necessarily. What do you mean?
Plenty tickets is being given out.
Well, the police don't make that. That goes towards the government.
Yeah, the government, that's the police aspect of the,
Yeah, because the police don't get benefit from that.
That's the only money they get. That's the only money they get right now.
The government. Yeah, that's the money the government will be getting. Yeah, but I mean, in terms of the layman on the road, I mean, they won't have much to spend, right? Because they don't have employment, they don't have a steady flow of income coming in, and then the survival is at stake and all these other things too, right? And if that's the whole situation there, so that's very iffy situation, right? And a budget surplus, if demand is reduced, that could also be due to curb the inflation, meaning because remember, inflation is a continuous rise on general price level. So if it is that prices are continuously increasing, right, then that means it will, in order for it not to get out of hand, is when the government would want to reduce spending, consumer spending and consumer demand. That means put it down to a controllable level, not for the extent that it spirals out of control, because then that might lead to devaluation of our dollar and all these other things, right? They could direct the surplus money to pay off loans. So they could probably try now to spend less and get more money and use that money, to pay out loans that they would have taken from the IMF and whoever, right? And here's the fourth one, to appease the IMF, who may have previously directed the government to produce such a budget. So you see, there are instances where the IMF will dictate to a government what kind of budget to have, especially if they would have taken a loan and the IMF would need their payments, because they would be able to control that government in terms of the policies that they make. And then the government will have no choice but to comply. Because it's like you have a gun to your head kind of thing. Right? Think about like a loan shark.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like that. So you have to do what they say. You know? A balanced budget. This occurs when the projected amount of all incomes. Now, projected here means that it is not the actual amount, it's what you forecast to happen. It's like when you're doing up your budget for the next month, and based on the kind of expenditure you use this month, you're forecasting what your expenditure will be for the next month, right? Which the Minister of Finance expects to derive from taxation and the sale of goods and services in the public sector equals or nearly equal to projected expenditure, right? So a balanced budget, or even a budget, remember it's a projection, any kind of budget, balance, surplus, deficit, is a projection, meaning it is not actually to come, is what you expect it to be like. Because remember in Trinidad and Tobago, our budget is based on the price of oil. So they would calculate the budget based on, let's just say, what they forecast or foresee the cost of a barrel to be it 45 US a barrel or however much, right? And that is what's the iffy thing about it, because we are so dependent on one main export commodity. Main is a keyword here. It makes it really a trouble situation then, because that means if the cost of oil goes down, which is the situation now, right? That means our budget will be low. It will still be in a deficit because you're not projecting much income to come in. That's all. It's like you're not working to full capacity in a way.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because we're not, because it means like you have a dip. So any questions so far on this budget handout?
No.
No,
I think that was straight to the point, yeah.
It was, yeah. It really was straight to the point. So we don't have to do much into it. But what we could do is just scan through the questions here now and see if there's anything you want to pick points to do. Anyone who wants to discuss?
All right.
Anything?
I already didn't choose that.
Uh-huh.
I already didn't choose that.
Okay, let me know when you're ready.
I said I already didn't choose.
Yeah. Say that over, please. Vanilla?
Yeah, I was looking at the mic. Yeah. Usually the questions will be basically realistic towards why the government
would want to have whether budget deficit or surplus or balance, right? So there's not much questions to come for the multiple choice. It's like probably one or two. And even if it does come in terms of a budget, it's usually very straightforward. Because just like the question, the handout is just as straightforward. So what you need to do is, and to the point. So what you really have to know is, like, for example, what a budget surplus, deficit, balance budget is. And for example, why would a government want to have either one? What are the benefits of it? Exactly the headings you see in this handout is exactly what you want to know. Nothing more, nothing less, basically, because that's the only way questions and budgets can come. And you realize you can see it in the questions, even in the structured questions here. It is the same thing.
Yeah.
There's no two other ways that that question could come.
And you think that it is to remember the IMF have both control on the deficit and the surplus. The only thing IMF don't have
basically if it is that
balance.
basically depends, right? It depends on if a country has gone to them or they would have approached a country in terms of taking out a loan. Only then can the IMF have any kind of input into the running of the country. But if you have not taken the advice or taken their money, they won't have any control over you because you still remain a sovereign country or a free country, right? It all depends on if you
owe the IMF or they come to you with a sweet cake. Oh.
Did I drop?
Hard to believe.
Come back on this one.
But it's still saying recorded.
Mm-hmm.
But we see it come up and
they probably dropped.
only see this.
The internet dropped. You become the host. Sure, come back on. It's still recording.
Okay. So?
Still?
She computer restarted.
Mm-hmm. Sure, come back on.
Right. So now that we're good with the budget handout, let's move on to the other handout, which is balance of payments. Right? And it would seem familiar because we would have been discussing it a while back in the other handouts. So it's not like we don't know what it is, right? But we're going to look at it a little deeper now. So let's see. Balance of payments, or POP for short in brackets. Don't put that in the exam though, but you don't have paper 2. So, but we still don't know because we don't know if the exam runs into October and they might even restructure it back again if you have to sit down and write the exam to paper 2. So we just don't know.
Oh, they probably already have the papers already waiting. So
yeah, they have it already because they would have prepared that all in advance for May, June this year. So they would have a paper 1, 2, and 3 already made out. And because of the situation now, that's when they decided to refer to paper 1 and paper 3 alone and let it be electronically done. But remember, even that is full of concerns because not everybody has a stable internet or even a laptop per se to do that.
Very true.
And if it is that they push it to October, because it's still don't know, given the way the situation is, Jamaica is probably now at their peak. Because I think they got 20 cases overnight in one day, and then afterwards they got 40 something in the next day. So it's crazy there. And even Barbados now is up, the numbers are increasing.
Yeah,
so
9 deaths.
Really?
Yeah, they're up to 9 deaths.
It's just a recording, huh?
Yeah.
9 deaths. That is all information.
I was reading.
Right. So let's look here. The balance of payments is an account of a country's payments and receipts. Again, you see in the bolded part there, so you want to make sure we focus on that part, right? Within a period of 1 year with the rest of the world. It records money coming in and going out of the country, right? So this is important here. It is concerned both with the visible trade and invisible trade. Visible meaning what you can see, and invisible meaning what you cannot, right? So visible would mean in terms of trading of goods, right? Like products you can touch, and invisible would refer to services, those that you cannot physically touch, right? Okay, so that's okay. If at the end of the year, a country recorded more inflows of foreign exchange, meaning more foreign exchange coming in than outflows, then this is known as a surplus or favorable balance. right? If inflows of foreign exchange are less than the outflows, this is referred to as a deficit or adverse balance of payment. That means less money is coming in, more money is going out, right? Balance of payments would have a lot to do with import and export. The difference between the value of imports and exports of goods is known as the balance of trade or the visible balance. The difference there, that means import minus export. So whatever you get after you minus the import minus the export, you get the balance of trade or BOT, right? Which is also the visible balance because that is what you can see. You can see the amount of goods coming in, not and going out, right? Where the total export figure is lower than the total import figure, this is referred to as an adverse balance of trade or trade deficit. That means you're importing more than you are exporting. Remember we discussed this before? You all remember that?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, most.
Right. So we just have to be very careful with this handout now in terms of a jargon, like the terms. So what you could do when you print out this handout is, or even in your notebook now, jot it down so you remember it. Because you don't want to have it confused. Because you see these handouts here structured in terms of how the multiple choice paper will come. So these questions will come to the end of your multiple choice. I have different numbers, 50 to 60, around that area. So you want to make sure you know what the terms are and not be confused by it. Because multiple choice can also be very tricky. Okay. Right. Okay. Visible trade refers to trade in physical goods, meaning what you can see. It's like your foodstuffs and your machinery and all of these things. And the difference between the value of imports and exports, we discussed this one already, right? Right, it's known as the balance of trade or the visible balance. Good, we discussed that. Invisible trade consists of three main types of transactions. So you want to make sure you know this, huh? Right? Services for one. The second one is the interest, your dividends, and your profits, meaning interest on what is the reward of interest for which factor of production?
Profit.
You think so?
Yeah.
Remember, what are the factors of production we know about?
Land.
Yeah.
Labor. Enterprise.
Uh-huh.
And one more.
Yeah.
Cell. CELL.
Right, and start with C. So what's the other one?
Capital.
Right. Very good. Very good. So what is the reward for land?
Labor.
How do you rent by?
Right.
The reward for land would be rent. What is the reward for labor?
That's what we try.
Huh?
I'm telling them try.
Yeah, what reward would you get? Yeah.
Profit.
No, bye.
Interest.
Bye. What reward would you get for working?
Wages.
Wages. Good. And what is the reward for capital?
It's internship, you know.
Interest, yes.
Have
it's
interest, right?
And what is the reward for your enterprise?
Entrepreneur. If I forget this,
it would be profits. Right? So for this one here, interest is the benefit or the reward you get for investing your capital. Right? And dividends is what you get for investing into shares. Not so? And profits is when that's the reward for your enterprise or entrepreneurs, right? So all of those would be considered invisible trade because they are the rewards that you get for investment. Transfer payments, for example, pensioners get an allowance, students get allowance from their parents. These are not payments for goods and services, but they are gifts or grants made to other countries. Like, you know, when your family from abroad send money to you via Western Union, you can consider it like a gift, right? Those are also traded, right? But they're not a physical trade to say you can touch it like a product. So they will be recorded under the invisible trade.
Wire transfer.
Right. So, but they call it a gift or a grant, right? So visible trade is what you can physically touch, like foodstuffs and machinery, right? And that's traded internationally. And the invisible trade now is what you cannot physically touch, like your services, like your profits, and all of these things, and those transfer payments, like which we consider like gifts, right? So we okay there so far. Remember, imports minus exports gives you your balance of trade. These things can either be visible or invisible. Visible would be the trade of physical goods, right? Like foodstuffs and machinery, and invisible trade would be services, transfer payments, and profits and all of these things. If it is that you're exporting more goods than you are importing, it is considered a balance of trade deficit. If you are exporting, no, sorry, I made that mistake. If you're importing more than you're exporting, it is a balance of trade deficit. If you are importing, what did I say? If you're importing, yes, I did. If you are importing more than you're exporting, it's a balance of trade deficit. If you're exporting more than you are importing, it is a favorable or surplus balance of trade. Right? So we okay?
Yes.
All right, good. So let's look now at the current account. All right. First of all, you all okay with the first half? Because I know I did a tongue twister just now, but you all okay with the first half?
Yeah,
So take 2 minutes and read it through, and then we would, if you have any questions on it, let me know. Right. So let's move on to the current account. When the balance of visible trade is added to the balance of invisible trade, the result is known as the current account balance. The current account balance is very important because it records a country's imports and exports, and it tells us whether a country is paying its way in the world. This part here is important, right? So let's look at the breakdown now, right? So we have under the current account, we have visible trade, and we know that refers to goods, right? So you're taking the export of goods and you minus the import of goods. When you do that, you get your balance of trade or your trade balance, or visible trade balance, right? Because that only takes into account the goods that you produce that you can touch, the visible ones, yeah? Now the invisible trade, which we know refers to services, right? So you take the export of services minus the import of services and you get a balance of invisible trade. This will bring you back into when we were calculating national income. And remember, coming down after collecting GDP, we had to include the net national income from abroad, net property income from abroad, which would have been from foreigners. Right. This should hopefully bring back some kind of memory flash into that. So in order to calculate your current account, you take your balance of visible trade and you add your balance of invisible trade. So you realize in order to do your current account, you have to have these two figures here.
Yeah.
Right, good. You just need to memorize that formula there. Those three, right? When the value of exports, and exports is the goods that you sell, is greater than the value of the goods you bring in or that you import, the account is said to be in a surplus or have a favorable balance. But when the value of imports is greater than the value of exports, the account is said to be in a deficit or have an unfavorable balance. And that's exactly what we just discussed, right? Even when we were looking at budget, it was very similar in the sense that your expenditure versus your revenue, yeah, and whether it was favorable or unfavorable, right? The capital account.
Yes.
So there are two accounts, the current account and the capital account. And we just looked at the current account. So now we're going to look at the capital account. This account records inflows and outflows based on one, short-term investment and long-term investment. Short-term investments are for a year or less. Long-term investments are for more than that, right? So for example, it looks at money inflows attracted by exchange and interest rates. Flows related to the purchase of shares and all these other things. So this capital account is dedicated towards that, towards the investment. Short-term and long-term, which deals with more exchange rate and interest rate, yeah? So let's look at official financing. This shows how a deficit or surplus was financed, meaning how it was brought about, whether it was by the IMF or whether it was from government bonding, borrowing, or whatever it was, yeah? Means how they were able to finance it. Okay so far?
Yeah.
All right, so let's just look at correcting an adverse balance of payment. And remember, adverse balance of payment would be we are importing more than we are exporting. Right? All right. So you reduce domestic spending. Domestic means spending within the country. Right. So you want to reduce that. And right. So reducing the effect of domestic spending here. This will be a reduction consumption. Consumption meaning when you consume goods, right? Particularly of imported goods and increase in exports. So you know how we were talking about last time, do we really need all those 50 different brands of conflict in groceries? No, we technically don't, right? So what this means, because I mean that will contribute towards our food import bill. And Trinidad's food import bill is quite high. So what it means is that instead of importing all of those things, we reduce the amount of imported food things, just as an example here, right? And focus on increasing our exports. That way, we could spend less foreign exchange on those imports and try to attain more revenue, foreign exchange revenue, by exporting more. That's simply what it means, right? Now, devaluation. This refers to decreasing the value of a currency. The effect is that a country's exports now become cheaper than they previously were, and other countries' imports become more expensive. This is the way where you would want to encourage other person, because you know, especially Trinidad, when they say something is a bit cheaper, they would more be inclined to partake in it as opposed to if the price is too high. So that is the method that the government can take care in terms of devaluating dollar. Now, it's not always means a good thing, huh? Because I remember everything else now that we have to import will become more expensive. To an extent, that could discourage people from importing, but it can also mean that they continue to import and then pass off that increased price to the consumer. So there are a lot of different takes on it. Right? Foreign borrowing. You're obtaining foreign loans from friendly countries or from international financial institutions. The international financial institutions here would mean the IMF and the World Bank, right? If you wanted to take a friendly loan, I think China probably giving out real loans these days. But it could be from any of your aid, right? Exchange controls, limiting the amount of money that can be spent on foreign goods or services. So you're making sure you don't overspend it, right? Tariffs, remember we came across these terms before, tariffs and quotas. A tariff will curb the imports coming into the country, meaning reduce it to some extent, right? And a quota, this is a numeric limit on imports. So it will have the same effect as a tariff, meaning you're limiting the amount of products that you import, right? Remember to know those terms, right? You want to increase the export. You will provide incentives should be offered to local manufacturers, such as a tax relief and extended credit facilities in industries involved in exporting goods. So you make it more lucrative then for them to want to export more goods, right? Because remember, you have to entice them if it is that they want to reduce the imports and increase the exports. So this is one way that you all could do that, that the government, sorry, could do that. Right? Okay. I want to take a few minutes break and then we'll continue with the other half. Take a no? Give me a 10 minutes now and then we take a 10-minute break and then we'll start back.
All right.
So yeah, so we'll come back at 20. Now 10 to, sorry, 10 to.
Okay.
Okay, all right. 11:59.
10 minutes.
All right, yeah. All right, so let's continue and look at disadvantages of a balance of payment deficit. Remember, we were saying that yes, there were some good things about it, but now we're going to look at the negative effects of the POP deficit. Right? So the first one is to finance the deficit. We borrow money to pay for our imports, right? So that means more borrowing going on there. When this is done continuously, remember I was telling you, we started class, it doesn't mean that a POP deficit is a bad thing. But if it was done continuously, then we find ourselves, right? The country will find itself owing large sums of money, and then this can escalate into a national debt problem. And this is something that we would want to make sure to avoid, right, as a country. After a while, we'll become a poor country to trade with, meaning nobody would want to trade with us, right? And others may think twice about trading with us. And that makes the situation worse. Because if nobody wants to trade with us, would our exports be high or low?
Low.
Exactly, it'll be low. And if our exports are low, that means we're getting less money in foreign reserves, also as income. So we will continuously be spending and spending all of our foreign exchange, limited as it is, on imports and less on exports. We'll be making less on exports, right? And that means we go further, we're taking the whole further deep now, right? So it's like a never-ending bad situation, right? All right, so we'll be able to add to foreign reserves, right? The country will be able to invest or make opportune purchases. Opportune meaning you will want to make those purchases that actually make sense to have, as opposed to spending on a wild on anything. The value of the country's currency will fall, and then we would lose international status, increase in unemployment, and a decrease in the standard of living. All of those things will take place once it is we continuously have a balance of payment deficit, right? You okay there, or have to go into any detail for any of those points?
Okay.
You okay? All right. So let's look at the advantages of it now. Remember, I was saying it's not a complete bad thing. So let's see what they have here. The advantages of a balance of payment deficit. We can only have an advantage when the deficit is a small amount and not continuous. Key thing here, only if it's a small amount and not continuous. Continuous meaning year after year.
Yeah.
Right. It can make a country more efficient and self-reliant because it acts as a wake-up call to make us reduce our imports and begin producing ourselves. So it's like, for example, prevention is better than cure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get a little taste of it, you would know, okay, here what, we can't continue like this. We need to have some strict measures. And those strict measures could mean now that we are forced to become more self-reliant and not depend on one export commodity, like what we are doing now, but in fact diversify, right? Expand our manufacturing sector, expand the amount of service sector, the services that we offer, and all of these things, right? And agriculture, expand on that, right? So therefore, we have to depend less on imports and import less, especially for food. Do you all know we import a lot of our seeds? Like Ministry of Agriculture imports a lot of the seeds and they distribute. Yeah. So even that we're importing, right? I mean, albeit we can't produce everything, but I mean, we could afford to ease up that food import bill to an extent, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in situations like this now during the pandemic.
People like nice living. So.
Basically, they like the comfort that it has, but they realize the pandemic is also resulting in people starting their own home gardens and all these other things. So they're forced to become self-reliant themselves. Yeah. Because it restricts their movement outside. So, I don't know, there's some good and some bad in it. Sorry. Right. If the deficit occurs in the current account, and remember the current account looks at what? Visible and invisible goods, right? The import and export of visible and invisible goods. So if the deficit happens in the current account due to the importation of raw materials, which a country needs for production and economic growth, then it can be advantageous. Remember, I told you, we were discussing it, I think on Wednesday, and we said that if it is about importing raw materials, right, it does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing because you're converting those raw materials now into a finished product. So you can charge additional in terms of if you're exporting for the final good. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Right. If the deficit occurs in the invisible balance, and that means services, right? Whenever you think in invisible, you know it's services. So if the deficit occurs in the invisible balance, and it is due to large amounts of money leaving the country in the form of investments, so only if it's in the form of investments, right? Then this is a good because the investments will obviously yield profits and dividends, which can be sent back home. And we know when we're calculating national income, we always record those things, right? In order to get our net national product, yeah? Mm-hmm. I hope those things bring back flashes of what we did previously. So you all can see now how they're linked. How all of those handouts, they are linked. Any problems so far, or are we okay?
Okay.
All right. All right, so let's move on into this latter part here. Terms of trade. This, you need to know, you see, you need to know the definition of balance of payment, what it comprises of in terms of the capital account and the current account, and you need to know terms of trade, because these will come in the latter half of your multiple choice paper, and especially the formula that you see it, like how we calculate the visible and invisible balance of trade, and the current account and the capital account, and all of these things. You need to know these things, and also the terms of trade one here, right? So this is the rate at which exports are exchanged for imports. It's the relationship between the price of imports and exports and its subset of the balance of payment. Let's see what it means. In order to calculate that, you take the index of export prices, you put it over the index of import prices, watch which one goes in the numerator, watch which one goes to the denominator, and then you multiply that by 100. Remember what the formula is, right? if the export prices rise faster than import prices in terms of trade, right? That means the numerator will be more than a denominator, right? It is said to be improving. But if the opposite thing happens, that in terms of trade is worsening or it is becoming unfavorable. And we could know this because we know that if it is that our imports are improving or increasing, more than our export is not really a good thing, right? That will give us our indication there. So what you can do here in situations like this is to leave the consumer with more disposable income. And again, disposable incomes means how much money they have in hand to spend so that they can increase their demand, right? And we all know what happens when demand is increased, right? It will now allow the consumer to improve their standard of living. Employment will also increase because now companies will have to increase their output to meet this increase in demand, right? And then if it is that they do this, more than likely they get more money in terms of profit. That profit can now be reinvested into the economy, right? We okay so far?
Yeah.
And then the same thing happens. The government can redistribute income to the lower income strata, right? And they have more money to spend in infrastructure such as schools and hospitals and roads and all of these things, right? Okay, that's the right. And that there brings us to the end of handout 22. So what we will do is just look at these paper 2 questions here, and I want you to go through it and let me know if there's specifically anyone you want to discuss. You see this calculation one here?
Yeah.
Right. These are how the questions would have come if you were doing the paper 2. So I want you to take about 5 minutes and scan it through and let us know which ones you want to discuss. Let me know when to scroll up.
So you done read? Let's take a scroll along a little bit, please. Stephen, you done read?
Yeah.
Let's take a scroll along a little bit, please.
Can you see about what? 3 questions?
Look at
Can you
questions
see
here. Any questions based on these?
No mess.
No? Okay.
Scroll down, yeah, you can scroll down a little bit.
Right. Up to here. Let me know when to scroll up.
It's question 9, May 20, 2005. These will have no problem.
Well, this is okay. The following information was taken from the financial accounts of Tropicalo, a country in the Caribbean Isle. The figures are quoted in US, and that's millions, right? So that's the export value there and the import value. Based on that alone, what you could decipher?
And they're spending more.
Exactly. Than they are receiving, right? But is it by a large amount or is it by an okay amount?
2,000.
So it's not as bad then.
Bad.
Right?
Not bad.
And right.
If it continues,
right.
it will be
And that's
bad.
your visible trade. So what does visible trade mean again?
things like goods and machinery.
Right, good. So things that you can see or your tangible goods there, right? Very good. And so that means they're importing more of those foodstuffs and machinery as they are exporting. So let's look at the invisible net. What does that show you there?
We say goods and we services is more.
Right, so they're exporting more of the services than they are importing. So do you think the final figure in terms of the balance of trade, would it be favorable or unfavorable? Because look at the disparity between the exports and the imports. Which one is higher?
The service.
Yes, the exports, right? So that means they're exporting more of their service than they're importing it by about 500 billion. So do you think, even with that disparity and the one above in terms of the visible trade, which one do you think, what do you think would be the end figure of the balance of trade when you have to add minus these things? Would it be favorable or unfavorable? We have to go back to the formula here for current accounts. So let's scroll back up. Here, you have visible trade, which is the goods, right? To find a current account, you take a visible trade and you add the invisible ones. So let's try to work this out, right? We know for the visible trade, it was 24. Take a calculator. You'll have a calculator there too. Or your phone or something. So let's write this down and see how we can calculate that. So, all right, let me use the whiteboard. And let's see. So for the first part, right, when you have to do the visible trade, let's see. It would be what? The visible trade would be what? What minus what? Let's see. Export is 24, 26. Okay, so exports minus the imports, right? So it would be 24 minus your 26. And how much you will get there? A negative 2. Right? That's what we have there. Now, our invisible trade we have to collect. Consider now.
Like 20,000.
Invisible trade would be how much? Let's go back to see how much it was.
2015 20,000
and 15.
20,000 and 15,000, yeah.
All right. So 20. Minus 15. And that would give us a positive 5,000 there, right? Now, in order to find the current account, what do we do? What do we take to minus what?
The export over the import multiplied by 100.
Right. So then that would be the export minus the import, you say?
Yeah, the export on top and the import to the bottom.
Oh no, but you're adding it. To find the current account, you're adding it.
Yeah.
So here's where your maths come into play. Well, let me see what we're adding. Which one we're adding and which. So your balance of visible minor plus your invisible. Let's see. And the visible would be negative 20. I'm just looking for the sign here. That's 5,000. What do we get there? Math people.
Yeah.
Huh?
I don't.
You get negative 15,000. So would it be favorable or unfavorable?
Unfavorable.
Unfavorable because it's right, because they're negative. So then you would have to make recommendations to the country based on that figure there. So let's see what the other questions look at. Right, so you see the first one, they just went through a difference between a terms of trade and balance of trade. Okay, right, which is what we just did. Calculate current account balance, which is what we just did. Right. Basically, all of those questions there, you realize the notes explain or give you a direct answer to them.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so all you need to know is the notes itself, right? Because in all of the questions, the trend is the same thing. They're basically asking you the same thing. So you just need to know the notes then and understand it. And all you have to do afterwards is plug in that information into the question. They would ask you the same thing in a different way. You're realizing that? Most of the times they're asking for the difference between POP and POT, right? And they're asking for what else? Right, explain two arguments about those things and explain these things, the effects of it, which we already have on the notes. So basically all you need to know is what is in the handout and how to apply it. And you can use these questions for practice. So when the multiple choice question comes, you'll be perfect enough to handle it. Yeah? What y'all thinking now? How was this handout than the one before?
A little complicated, but
This one was a bit complicated or the other one?
this one.
This one. Because of the calculations and the terms. Or because of something else? What makes it complicated?
What it changes.
Terms?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what we have to do there is to make sure we try to review it, reread it during our free time. That's why I tell you keep jotting down the main points there. So you want to reread it and make sure you can explain it back to yourself then. Once you can explain it back to yourself, then you will, like verbally, you'll hear yourself talking about it and more than likely it will start to stick. But I wanted to do that for homework. I wanted to read it through, go it over, and whatever questions you have on it, bring it back on Wednesday, God willing, and we will discuss it again. We will go over again and then continue with the other handout. Sounds okay?
Yeah, miss?
Sounds okay, guys?
Caroline.
Caroline, how are you there?
Hello, morning. I don't know if you can hear me good.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Girl, they like good night.
Like there are troubles coming, boy. I don't know. I don't know. I try all kind of thing and just keep on
Uh-oh. All right, but we okay so far, guys?
Yeah, miss?
All right, so that's your homework for today, right? It would be to review this handout, go it over properly, and whatever questions you have, and we will discuss it on Wednesday, God willing. Right? Right, so make sure you come with your questions on Wednesday, and we'll discuss further, and then we could move on to the other handout. But let me know first what your questions are for this one. Make sure you go to the questions at the end, pass the questions to the end, so we'll have a greater fatigue. Okay then.
It's
have a
most
good.
likely I go ask it
Redo it?
when we doing over. Yeah, I get most likely.
No problem. But still reread it now. So you would have some kind of backing before we go into it again. Right?
You
And I
gotta
will
send
try
out-
to pull out some multiple choice questions specifically on this topic so we could see how it comes.
you gotta send us the
And I hear you.
you gotta send all the 2 handouts,
I
or
think, no, I sent
the
it out
last handout
already.
was taxation. The last handout I see.
You sure? I sent an email
Yeah.
sometime this week.
Yeah,
I-
taxation.
That's the one I sent
Mm-hmm.
on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will send this back then. I'll send this back after this class.
Budget handout, and that was it.
Okay, so I'll send this back after class, and then you all can review it in time for Wednesday, and we will rediscuss it. But come with your questions to her. I want you to really read it and come with your questions and tell me what specifically it is you don't understand. Right? Look at the questions, and that will help you figure out what it is they understand, what you don't. And while you're doing that, jot down the formulae and what each term means. It's only when you do things like that, then it will become easier for you to understand. Right? So we okay so far in terms of what our homework is.
Yeah.
All right, good. So I will see you all on Wednesday, God willing. Have a good Sunday.
Yeah, listen to you.
Okay. Right. Bye. Just now, just really. If yes, you receive an email notification by college.